about how to show allocative efficiency on a graph, right? So that is what we're discussing. How to show allocative efficiency on a graph, right? Okay. Now, so far we have discussed the definition of allocative efficiency. We said allocative efficiency is when you're producing goods that are most wanted and in the right quantities. You're producing goods that are most wanted and in the right quantities. Okay. How to show allocative efficiency on a graph, right? Okay. The second part to allocative efficiency is producing goods in the right quantities. Now for this, what we'll do, we'll make a graph, right? And then we'll see how to do that, right? Okay, so have a look at this, right? Okay, just a second, right? So you have, let's say, you have price and cost on the y-axis, right? And you have the quantity of the good that you will produce on the x-axis, right? Quantity of the good that you will produce on the x-axis, right? Okay, or you can say output, quantity, whatever you're more comfortable with, right? Okay, now have a look at this. There is this thing known as demand curve that you already know, and you know very well from your AS level classes, that the demand curve for a product shows how much quantity consumers are willing to buy at a certain price. What does demand curve of a product show you? It shows how much quantity of the good consumers are willing to buy at different price levels, right? That is what it shows. So you have quantity on the x-axis, you have price on the y-axis, and this is how the graph looks like. So if I choose any random point on demand curve A and then demand curve B, oh, sorry, point B on the demand curve. Now, what is point A showing us? Point A shows, let's say, if the price is, let's say, if the price of the good is $20 per unit, there will be a total demand of 500 units in the market, right? So point A, if you're operating on point A of the demand curve, then it means that for $20 per unit, the total demand in the market is 500 units. If you move from point A to point B, you will be moving down on the graph, and you will see that this means that, let's say, for $10, right? For $10 per unit, your demand will increase to 700 units, right? Is this clear? Now, in reality, if you think in a way, demand curve shows you the value that consumers place on a good. The value that consumers place on a good is shown by the demand curve, right? How much value you're willing to give for a good, that is given on the y-axis. So the value that consumers place on a product is shown through demand curve. Value that consumers place on a good, right? Is this making sense, students? Is shown through demand curve. Okay. Now the idea I've already explained. If you're willing to pay a higher price for a product, what does it actually show? If you're willing to pay a higher price for a good, let's say a lot of people were willing to pay to get themselves tested for COVID, because obviously if you have COVID, then you have to take certain precautions. You have to isolate yourself, complete the quarantine, take the medicines, blah, 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 right? Now, coming back to the point, the thing is, suppliers can charge higher prices. Yes, but right now we are not talking about the market demand. So we are not talking about the equilibrium prices. We're just talking about the price that consumers are willing to pay. Yeah, that's correct. So Preet, what you're saying, that's absolutely correct on the good on which the price is high. Yeah, true. So when something gets more valuable, producers will want to produce more of that because that gives them more profit. That is what the supply curve shows. Very good, excellent. Okay, but right now we're just focusing on the demand curve, and we said that the value that consumers place on a good is shown through demand curve, because the more the price you're willing to pay, this means the more the value you attach to a good, right? That's why people are willing to pay higher price for Samsung and higher price for Apple, because they place more value to these products compared to some other cheaper brands of the phone, right? So that is what it shows. Okay, now this is your demand curve, and it also shows you the price. So I can write this down as D equals P. So this is your demand curve, which is also showing you the price of the good, right? Easy, simple. Okay, now comes in another interesting thing. Now you have to listen to this very carefully. There is this thing called, marginal cost. There is this thing called marginal cost. And since you are coming across this term for the first time, so I would explain you in detail. What is marginal cost, right? Preet, do you remember? We discussed this yesterday. What is marginal cost? Marginal is a word that you will often hear in A2 economics, right? And even later on, if you take economics later on in your university level or so on, right? So you will frequently come across the term marginal. Marginal in economic means additional. What does the word marginal means? It means additional, right? Now, additional cost, what do we mean by that? It means the cost of producing the, or the additional word would be better, the increase in cost due to producing one more unit of the good. The increase in cost due to producing one more unit of the good, right? One more unit of the good. Okay, now think about this. If let's say, as I was giving you the example yesterday, right? If let's say there is a business that has produced 100 tables already, right? So there's a business, furniture manufacturing shop or whatever you want to call it, and it has manufactured 100 tables. Now it wants to increase its production from 100 to 101. It wants to increase its production from 100 to 101, right? Now, may I ask you that what will be the addition in cost by producing this one additional unit of the good? By what are the cost components that will increase for the firm by producing this one additional unit of the good? So can you identify those for me, right? Right? So think about this. If you need to make one more table, right? So the marginal cost would be, it would include the raw material. So if it's a wooden table or a plastic table or whatever it is, right? Definitely you need some raw material. So how much is the cost of the wood, or how much is the cost of that plastic that you're using? That is your raw material. As simple as that, right? Then the other thing that you would need to manufacture a table would be the labor, right? So obviously labor is not free. So if labor is working, and most of the times we're paying labor for, hourly wages, right? So the more the hours that a labor puts in, the more the wages you will be paying to the labor. Am I making sense or not? Right? And then obviously there will be some other expenses, right? Minor expenses like painting the table, blah, 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 polishing the table, whatever it is, right? But these are the additional costs that you have to spend to produce one more table, right? So that is what marginal cost is, that the increase in cost due to producing one more unit of the good, that is your marginal cost. Now, why is the shape of marginal cost curve like this? So why is it not like this? Why is it not like this? Why is it not like this, right? So why is it J-shaped? So we will study this again, right? So we will study the shape of the marginal cost when we reach to unit 2, where we'll talk about the types of cost. But for now, we have to assume that marginal cost will always be J-shaped, right? So when we move to unit 2, we will talk about types of cost. Then we'll discuss explicitly that why the shape of marginal cost is J-shaped. But for now, you have to take it as given. Easy? Is it making sense? Any confusion so far? Okay. Now, what is the significance of marginal cost over here? So marginal cost shows how much it costs you to produce an additional unit of the good, and price is showing you how much value consumers are placing on the good. I repeat, marginal cost shows how much it costs a country, how much it costs an economy to produce an additional unit of the good, and price of the product shows you the value that consumers place on that good, how much they value it, Okay, now let's assume I choose a random point, right? So if you're producing the first unit, let's say you're producing the first unit of the good, how much price are consumers willing to pay for the good? How much price are consumers willing to pay for the good? It will be over here, right? Because that is shown by the demand curve, right? So let's say consumers are willing to pay $10 for this table. And how much it costs you to produce this table? The first unit of table costed you, let's say, I don't know, $3. Is making sense? So my question to you is it worth it? Is it worth it to produce this unit of the table? Should a country produce this or should a country not produce it? Right? The answer to that is yes. Why is yes? Because think about this. The price that consumers are willing to pay, the price that consumers are willing to pay for this table is greater than the cost it takes to produce it. Yes? Hold on, right? So the price that consumers are willing to pay is greater than what it takes to compared to the cost that it takes to manufacture or produce the table. So yes, you should produce it, right? Similarly, we'll take another option, right? So if you're producing unit 2, again, you can see second unit, right? So marginal cost is lower, somewhat around $3, right? And your price that consumers are willing to pay is, let's say, $8 or something. Again, it is worth it to produce that table. Similarly, third unit, similarly, fourth unit, and so on, right? Now let's assume this is the fifth unit. This is the fifth unit. What is true at fifth unit? At fifth unit, the price that consumers are willing to pay for this good is exactly the same how much it costs you to produce that good. Are you getting? Right? Uda? So on the fifth unit, since the demand curve is intersecting with the marginal cost, it means that the price that consumers are willing to pay is also $4, and the cost it takes you to manufacture this unit is also $4. So producers will technically will not make a profit out of it. Producers will not make a profit out of it because the price is exactly the same as the marginal cost. Am I making sense to you? Right. So technically, it's not worth it because it's break even. In business studies, you must have studied this term break even when you're making no profit, no loss. But on the previous units, you made a profit. On the previous units, less like apart from the fifth, because on the fifth, price was exactly equal to the cost. But on previous units, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, you made a profit. Am I right with this? Right. So now comes in the main part. The main part says that a country or an economy should produce goods up to the point where marginal cost is equals to price, right? Why so? Think about this. Because even for the fifth unit, hold on, listen to this carefully. Even for the fifth unit, the value that consumers place on the good in terms of the price is the same as much it costs you to produce the good, as much it costs you to produce the good. So technically, it's worth producing. So technically, it is worth producing, right? So coming back to the point where price is equals to marginal cost, that is the output level that is allocatively efficient. Now, this might sound a little surprising, but I'll explain you, right? So where the price of the good is equals to marginal cost, that is allocatively efficient output level. What is that? That is allocatively efficient output level. Any confusion so far? Right? Anything less, Huda, will not be allocatively efficient because you are underproducing. Something is worth producing, but you're not producing it. And any quantity greater than this, do you think producers will be interested in producing any quantity more than any quantity more than 5 units? Do you think producers will be interested in producing anything in this region of the graph? No, right? Because the answer is simple and very simple, that you can see after this point, marginal cost becomes higher than the price. So if consumers are not willing to pay even to compensate for the price, why would you produce that? It doesn't make sense. Yes or no? So if a bottle of juice costs you $10 to manufacture and you are selling it for, let's say, $8, I mean, you will be making a loss of $2. Why would any sane producer want to produce that? So obviously that is not what any business or any government would want people to do. But up till this point is allocatively efficient. Why? Because your price is equal to your marginal cost. You're producing something for which the consumers place a value which is equals to the cost of manufacturing that. Yes or no? So up till this point, from 0 to 5 units of the good is allocatively efficient. So from 0 to 5 units is allocatively efficient. Anything more you won't do, anything less would also not do, because that would be underproducing if we produce anything less than this. Huda, Preet, this is making sense. Any confusion that you did not understand? So coming back to the definition that we were looking at, allocative efficiency said producing goods in the right, producing goods that are most wanted and in the right quantities. So most wanted, we did answer that depending upon the need of the hour, a country will decide what things should be prioritized, right? And the quantity part, we just answered it. Producing goods that are most wanted and in the right quantities. Producing goods that are most needed or wanted in the right quantities. Right? Okay. Okay. Now, quantity, is everyone clear on this, right? If still it's not clear that why you should produce up till the level where price is equals to marginal cost, please feel free to ask me again, right? So I said a country should produce up to the point where the value, a country should produce a good up to the point where the value that consumers place on the good is equal to the cost of manufacturing it. Is equal to the cost of manufacturing it. Is it making sense, right? So that is what you need to remember. So the output level where price is equals to marginal cost, that is allocatively efficient output level. Anything less than that would be underproduction, as I was showing you over here. So anything less than this, like less than 5 units, would be underproduction, and anything more than this would be overproduction. Or like, you will not want to even go into that zone, because then you will start making a loss. So you don't want to do that, right? But anything less than 5 units in this case would be inefficient, because that is under production. Is making sense? Any confusion, anything that's not clear? Right? So that is what you need to remember. Okay, now this being said, we'll move forward. Right? Okay. Okay, so underproduction. Okay, now moving forward from here, very good, excellent. We have so far discussed what is productive efficiency. We have discussed what is allocative efficiency. We have talked about the graphs. We have seen how we show productive efficiency on a graph. We have shown how we show allocative efficiency on a graph, right? So this part is all clear. Okay, now we are moving forward and we are about to start off another topic, another subtopic of this topic, which is economic efficiency. And that is of more interest. That should be of more interest to you, because this is more related to, this is more practical, as I would say. Okay, now the thing is, think about this. We already know that what is efficiency, and how can we tell by looking at the graphs whether a business or whether a firm or whether a country is efficient, is if it is productively or allocatively efficient, or if it is not, right? Okay, we did discuss that. But how do we apply this in the real life? How do we use these concepts, how do economists use these concepts in real life to make some policies, or to make some, some regulations or anything of the sort? Now this brings us to something very interesting, and that is, under what conditions does economic efficiency exist? So the next question that we are about to discuss right now is, under what conditions economic efficiency exist, right? Now we are about to look at scenarios, situations where economic efficiency exists. And similarly, after this, we will look at situations or scenarios where economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? So when economic efficiency doesn't exist, is that a problem for a country? My question to you is, if there is a situation or scenario where economic efficiency doesn't exist, is that a problem for a country or is that not? You think it's perfectly fine? I mean, if there's inefficiency, that should not be a problem. Exactly. Excellent, right? So it is a problem for a country if economic efficiency doesn't exist, because as Preet said, it shows that you are misusing or you are wasting your resources. So you are not using your resources to the full potential, which is not obviously recommended, because that will mean that you will be able to produce, you will not be able to produce more quantities of goods and services. So if a country wants to produce, wants to maximize its output, if a country wants to maximize the output in terms of goods and services, then it needs to use its resources efficiently, as simple as that. Otherwise, you will not be able to maximize your output. So that's the reasoning behind it. So coming back to the point that we were discussing over here, right? Under what conditions economic efficiency exists? And now this brings us to the next topic of our discussion, which is perfect competition. Now I'll give you some overview of this, but before this, let me tell you what happens when economic efficiency doesn't exist. What happens, right? Or a better thing to say would be, under what circumstances economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? Now think about this. We're talking about both sides. Under what conditions, circumstances, economic efficiency exists, and under what circumstances economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? Okay. Now students, stay with me. You must have heard the word monopoly. Have you heard the word? Are you familiar with the word monopoly, or is this a new term for you? Right? Does not exist. Under what conditions economic efficiency does not exist? So the question that I asked you, have you heard the word monopoly, or is this a new term for you? Right, you have. What does monopoly mean? Huda, can you quickly tell me what is the meaning of the word monopoly? There was also a game, right? You might have played that in your childhood, a board game by the name of Monopoly. You might have played it, you might not have played it, that's fine. Single seller in the market, absolutely, absolutely, right? So monopoly is a situation where there's a single producer, single seller in the market. That is a monopoly. And we will talk about it, that why in monopoly economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? Similarly, there's another concept that you might have studied, you might not have, externality. So externality is when I'm doing something, but other people around me are getting affected. Let me give you an example. If I'm smoking, right. So I mean, there are different definitions for it. A very extreme case of monopoly would be where there's only one seller, right? There's only one seller. But obviously, in some cases, monopoly can also mean when there are more sellers, but one seller has a huge power over the market, right? That one seller has huge control over the market. Okay. Now think about this. Externalities is another case of market failure, right? What is externalities? I will give you an example. Externality is when you are doing, when a person in a country is doing something and that is causing positive or negative effect on the third party. That is an externality. So an example of that would be, think about this. If one person is smoking, the other people around him or her will be, will be affected by passive smoking, right? Because they will be inhaling the smoke, and that is passive smoking. So that is negative externality. Similarly, if you're driving fast on the road, then you are putting your life at risk, but at the same time, you're also putting the life of other people at risk. Why? Because if, God forbid, your car crashes into someone else, then that person will also suffer the injury, right? So that is a negative externality. smoking, drinking, drunk driving, blah, 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 right? So we'll talk about it later on when we move to this part. Okay. Then there are some other cases of market failure that I do not want to mention. Okay. Now this is a new term that I want to explain you. Absence of economic efficiency means absence of economic efficiency, which means scenario where economic efficiency doesn't exist. Absence of economic efficiency is known as market failure, is defined as or known as whatever you want to say, is defined as market failure. So what I said over here is that when efficiency is missing, that is known as market failure. We say that the market has failed. The market has failed. So if I say that monopoly is market failure, you will be able to understand from now onwards that this means that if monopoly is market failure, it means that in monopoly, economic efficiency doesn't exist. Similarly, when I say that externalities is a case of market failure, you would know that in the case of externalities, efficiency doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. Is making sense to you? So this new word, you might have studied this in your AS as well, by the way, you must have, right? But here is the new definition for it. So absence of economic efficiency is known as market failure, right? So now moving forward, what we'll do is first we'll talk about perfect competition and what that is, right? And then we'll see how economic efficiency exists in perfect competition. So what is perfect competition? We'll define it, right? Study its characteristics, right? Right? What are the characteristics of perfect competition? And then we'll see how economic efficiency exists in this case. Study characteristics, how economic efficiency exists in this case. Right? This is making sense to you, students? And on the other hand, similarly, we'll do the same three things over here. What is monopoly? What are the characteristics of monopoly and why economic efficiency doesn't exist? We'll talk about it, right? So that is what we're about to do. So is everyone clear on what we're about to do next? Students, are you clear on what we are about to do next? So we are about to define perfect competition, its characteristics, and then we'll see how economic efficiency exists. Okay, perfect. Very good. And then we'll do the same for market failure cases. Okay, now let's move on and discuss. This is definitely a new word for you all. Perfect competition. Now, as the word suggests, you would be getting some idea out of this. Competition is when we in economics we talk about competition. Otherwise, competition is a very common word. You always talk about it, right? In my class, there's too much of competition. This year there was too much of competition in the IGCSEs exams and very high number of competitors. Exactly. But when we talk about economics, we mean that there are a lot of firms. Because what is competition in the market? When there are multiple firms. So if there is mega lecture and then there is Indian firms that are providing online teaching services, and then there are Pakistani firms. I mean, there's a long list of online teaching platforms. So it's a very competitive market. What is it? A very competitive market. Producers try to keep the lowest cost and prices. Absolutely, absolutely, right? So perfect competition is a market where there is a lot of competition, right? So I'm just writing a basic definition over here. Is a market where there are multiple firms producing similar products, right? Producing similar. Now, similar, what does similar exactly means? We'll talk about it. Producing similar, you already know similar means same. Similar products. So that is perfect competition. Okay. Now, we just came across a basic definition of perfect competition that says perfect competition is a market where there are multiple firms producing similar products. Okay, perfect, great. Let's move on. Now we will list characteristics of perfect competition. We'll talk about all the characteristics of perfect competition. Like we'll be more specific here, right? Do you understand what characteristics means? Characteristics means what are the features that define something, right? So if I say, what are the characteristics of a good student? So you would say anyone who is taking class regularly, anyone who is preparing well for the exam, anyone who's organized, blah, 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 blah. So these are the characteristics, right? So what are the characteristics of perfect competition? So if I say right? So here's the first one, a large number of firms. So in this type of market, you will see, as Preet was saying over here, a large number of firms. So you'll see multiple firms that are producing similar products, right? Large number of firms. Then another thing that you'll see in perfect competition, right? I'll give you an example, a real life example. Don't worry about it, right? Large number of firms. Now, the second thing is a little tricky. All firms are producing homogeneous products. Now, what does the word homogeneous means, right? I'm using the word homogeneous because that is what you will see in your textbook. That is what you will see in your past papers. So obviously you should know the word homogeneous, right? Homogeneous in simple English means identical, similar or identical products. Now, what does identical means? Producing homogeneous products. Identical means exactly the same. What does identical means? Exactly the same. Similar, very good. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Now, before we move any forward, let's talk about this, right? And there is no branding. This is a very, very important characteristics. And there is no branding. Think about this. If you go to a shop and you feel like buying a soft drink, now listen to me very carefully. This is a very important point I'm about to explain. If you go to a shop and you say, give me soda, give me soft drink, what will the shopkeeper ask you? Is this enough of information for the shopkeeper to know what you're asking for? If you go and you say that you want juice, or if you go and say you want, I don't know, soda, soft drink, is this enough? No, right? What do you say? On the other hand, just imagine, what do you say to a shopkeeper? You say, I want Coke, I want Pepsi, I want, I don't know, Milo, I want name of the drink. Now, what is this? Name of a drink. All of these are soft drinks, but you're asking for a specific product. Similarly, when you go to a shop, you don't say, give me a shampoo or give me a soap. You take the name of that soap, specific brand. Exactly. Absolutely. Right. When I go to shop, I say, I want Sunsilk. I want Head and Shoulders. I want anything of these brands, right? Now, here I'm taking the name of the brand. But imagine yourself going to a grocery, going for groceries and going to buy, let's say, food items. And what would you say to the shopkeeper? You want bananas, right? Or you want apples, or you want, I don't know, rice or something of the sort, right? Now, in most cases, the agricultural products, or at least the vegetables or the fruits, do not have a brand. They do not have a brand. There might be a brand written on it, but you're like, okay, if this banana is produced in Pakistan, it will taste the same. So whether you buy banana in Karachi or you buy banana in Islamabad, Pakistani banana will taste the same. Yeah, across countries, it might taste a little different, right? But same goes for India, right? So a banana in Delhi will taste you the same as in, I don't know, Mumbai or some other city, right? Is this making sense, students? Am I making sense to you all? So these products are homogeneous because it's exactly the same and there is no branding. So this market, exactly, this market of agricultural goods is a perfect example. Agricultural market is a perfect example of perfect competition, right? Because there are a lot of firms. Just think about it. How many farmers in Pakistan or how many farmers in India grow agricultural goods? Thousands, millions. Am I right? Thousands and millions of farmers. Similarly, all products, regardless of whether it was grown, right? They taste the same, they look the same, right? Yes or no, right? And most important of all, there's no branding. There's no branding, right? Okay. Now, this being said, we'll move on and discuss a little further. No entry and exit barrier. Now, this is where it gets a little more complicated. No entry and exit barriers. Now, what do we mean by that? Entry and exit barriers. Entry means entry into the market. Entry means entry into the market, right? Now, think about this. For new firms to enter a market, there are some challenges that you have to face. When a new firm is entering the market, there are some challenges that you have to face. Now, let me list down some of those. Firstly, high investment requirement. Why do you not see so many cinema theaters, right? In Any big city, you'll find 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Maximum 10, 12, right? But not more than that. But if you think of restaurants, I mean, hundreds of restaurants in any big city, yes or no? Or another good example of that would be, think about a business that manufactures cars, right? So how many businesses manufacture cars in this entire country, sorry, in this entire world, compared to businesses that are manufacturing clothes? So there are much, much, much more brands of manufacturing clothes, because clothes are relatively easy, less complicated product to produce compared to producing a car. Am I making sense to you all or not? Right? So sometimes high investment requirement is a barrier, right? Similarly, if you think about telecommunication industry, right? How many cellular services like firms do you find? In Pakistan, we have 5, right? Zong, Mobilink, Warid, blah, blah, blah. In USA, again, there are 2 or 3 big firms, right? Yes or no, right? Does it make sense? Exactly. So high investment requirement make it difficult for new firms to enter the market. That is one entry barrier. Huda, are you following me? Then another challenge is well-established firms. Sometimes it is not about the investment, it is about, being in competition with other established businesses, right? So think about this. If a new online teaching platform setups in Pakistan, right? Investment requirement, I don't think it's very huge in this case. But the problem is they will have to compete with Mega Lecture, which has already been up and running for some time. Students know about it, blah, 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 blah. Similarly, think of the Coke, right? Coke and Pepsi are quite old, but the local brands, there are local brands, right? Even in Pakistan, some brands tried to open up, they tried to produce soda, but they were not very successful because, people have used Coke and consumed Coke and Pepsi since ages, right? So they are more used to that taste, they are more used to that branding and so on, right? So well-established businesses is another entry barrier. Yes or no? Sometimes entry barriers are legal constraints. Now, this is very important for you to understand. What are legal constraints? Legal constraints mean copyrights. Have you ever heard the word copyrights? You must have. Copyrights, patents, right? You do not have the copyrights for this, right? So what happens if you copy anyone else, you know, song, right? So that means that you have technically cheated, right? Intellectual property, right? So if it was my music, it was my, if I'm a singer, I'm not, right? If I'm a singer, I make a song and someone else copies it, then that person will be infringing my copyrights because that is my intellectual property. That music, that sound is my intellectual property, right? So legal constraints, sometimes for pharmaceutical companies, right? So not every pharmaceutical companies making the COVID vaccination. Why? Because you need to have the copyrights, right? You have to buy the formula from someone else. Apparently, it's very simple. You buy any vaccination, you see what is it made up of, chemical formula, chemical composition, and you can make one. But in the modern world, this is not how it works, right? Other people have the copyrights to it, other companies. So you have to purchase that formula from them, right? So please, we'll try to wrap it up. We'll try to wrap it up today, right? And then we'll continue from here in the next class. And then if you feel the need, uh, we'll also do an extra class over the weekend. So students, will continue exactly from the same point, but let's do a quick recap. After knowing what productive and allocative efficiency is, we talked about under what circumstances economic efficiency exists, and we said perfect competition is where there's complete economic efficiency, right? And that is what we are discussing. And under what conditions economic efficiency doesn't exist, and we came across monopoly, externalities, and some other examples that will come at a later, that we'll discuss at a later stage. And these cases are known as market failure. Then we talked about what is perfect competition. It's a market where there are multiple firms and they are producing similar products. Then we started off with that discussion of the characteristics of perfect competition. We said there are a large number of firms, they're producing homogeneous products, and there's no branding. And then the last part that we were discussing, but we could not complete, is entry barrier. What is entry barrier? Anything that makes it difficult for new firms to enter. High investment requirement could be an entry barrier. Well-established businesses could be an entry barrier, or legal constraints in terms of copyrights or patents can be an entry barrier. So we'll stop here for today, and tomorrow we will pick up from exactly the same point, and will continue from there. And tomorrow the class timings would be the same as usual, 7 to 7:45 Pakistani time, right? So I'll see you tomorrow, students, right? Take care. Have a good night and see you tomorrow. Okay, take care. Bye.